Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Lyndsey Layton from the Washington Post. I'm here to talk with this fantastic panel about career preparedness in 2016 and what that means, what it is, what the challenges are for states, for school districts, for educators, how what Louisiana has done can be replicated in other parts of the country. We're going to have a really meaty discussion, I hope, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys for any sort of questions and discussions towards the end of the program. So, career preparedness. What is that? When I was going to high school, in my public high school, we had automotive repair, we had business classes, I think, and we had wood shop. For most of the 20th century, until about the 1980s, we had vocational technical training in public schools and then college tracks. And then somewhere around the 1980s, the mission of public schools shifted, and it was all about sending kids and preparing kids for college, and vocational technical training kind of fell by the wayside until very recently. There's concern about a skills gap, there's new energy behind career preparedness, and we're seeing all sorts of initiatives popping up around the country, in the states, in school districts, at the federal level, a lot of interest in career preparedness. But what does that mean in 2016? What is career preparedness? I'm sure it's not what I experienced when I was in high school. It's got to be something different. So I think what we're going to do is discuss some of that now with this terrific panel that we've got. We're very lucky to be joined today by, to my left, Gayle Flowers. Gayle comes at this from two perspectives. She's currently the Vice Chancellor of Economic and Workforce Development at Bossier Parish Community College. I got that right?
Yes,
okay. My Yankee roots are showing, so I was trying to get that right. Where she works in, this is in the community college level, looking at preparedness programs at the community college. But she also, for a long period of time prior to that, worked for the Caddo Parish Public Schools. So in the K through 12 realm, where she developed programs for kids in K through 12 for career preparedness. So Gayle is here with us. Next to Gayle, we've got John White, who many of you know. He's the State Superintendent of Education in Louisiana. He's been there since 2012. When John came to Louisiana, he launched the Louisiana Believes program with an emphasis on career preparation. Prior to that, he was the superintendent of the Recovery School District, and before that, worked in the New York City schools under the Chancellor Joel Klein in the Bloomberg administration. And next to John, we've got Deidra Jackson. Deidra is a principal at Opus Capital Strategies, where she works with business and industry in Louisiana, and is sort of the liaison or the consultant between business and industry and the K through 12 school systems, and helps design career preparedness and brings the mindset of industry to this issue. So we've got a terrific panel, people who come at this from all different angles, and we're excited to talk about this today. So the first thing I would really love to hear from our panel is a definition of career pathways. What is vocational technical training in 2016? Gayle.
Well, I would say that a career pathway is a structured sequence of courses leading to academic foundation skills, technical skills, and employability skills with multiple entry and exit points that lead to a family-sustaining career in a high-wage, high-growth industry sector. It includes things like critical thinking, problem-solving, communication skills that are needed for college and for careers, but that career pathway is specific to preparation for an industry sector with a real need.
Thanks, Gayle. John?
I think that's thorough enough. Gayle hit the high points. I would agree with everything that she said. I would say that I've come to see career education, however one defines it, and Gayle's definition got at a lot of this, as necessarily rigorous, but oftentimes the most authentic moments of learning that a young man and woman has in a day. And I do think that that's an important distinction to draw. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we have to accept, I think, that as adolescents go on in their lives, that their interests diverge, that they become much more sophisticated and complicated human beings, and that just like anyone in this room, they may not be interested exclusively in US history or in the Spanish language. And as a result, many of those kids' most authentic experiences are in sports or in band, and then we wonder why they love sports and band so much. Well, why? Because it's about having authentic relationships with one another, authentic relationships with adults, authentic relationships with the work, and a real feeling of growth and an ability to reflect on that growth. To the degree that an applied experience, rather than a more traditionally academic experience, gives a young man or a young woman that experience of reflection, that experience of growth, that experience of relevance and relationships, then to me that's what this applied career and technical education learning should be.
Terrific. And Deidra?
Yes, so it's difficult to come behind those two. So I'll just add another layer of career readiness and what it means to me. Definitely the connection between what you are learning in the traditional classroom and having workplace experiences at an earlier entry point to shape what opportunities you see available to you as a student. And also that extends into parents and to guardians and a community as a whole. And so I think being realistic and also being practical about where students want to go as early as middle school and having exposure, and way earlier exposure than a lot of us did at that age will only allow them to grow and to seek greater opportunities and limitless opportunities in whatever pathway they choose moving forward.
So can you tell us a little bit about Louisiana's experience in this realm and just how the state, John, you can probably lead us through this, but how Louisiana embraced career preparedness? What were the challenges that you faced? What were some of the successes that you've had? And just lead us through why the state has embraced career preparedness as opposed to that notion that everybody should go to college. There's been this whole shift happening around the country. What's triggered it?
Well, I think first it's important to say that we are at the start, in a sense, of a statewide journey. We're several years into what I hope is a multi-generational journey. It's one that folks like Gayle, who have been doing work, have been doing, I think, in pockets of excellence. And what we're really then talking about is the scaling of those pockets of excellence across an entire state, which for us has been 3 or 4 years in the making, and we're starting to see good results, but we're not nearly at a point of real fruition. That said, I would say that the state has a number of roles that, if it plays them correctly, can catalyze this kind of movement, as you say, this shift in focus. We did it because we started thinking less in terms of, in the post-No Child Left Behind era, less in terms of just, how much are we growing our kids from one year to the next and making adequate yearly progress and such, toward, when we reflect on it, what are we really as schools looking to do? And are we using every opportunity, every asset in our society at our disposal to help our kids do that? And we're trying to get them to be responsible, reflective, young people with a pathway, as Deidra said, to economic opportunity. And I think we have to be real as a country that we haven't opened up the doors, especially of our high schools, which are supposed to be engines of prosperity and engines of opportunity and self-discovery. We haven't opened them up to industry, and largely we haven't even opened them up to higher education. And when you come to that recognition, that for all of those kids who cross a dais like this every May or June to get a diploma, that in a state like ours, only 20% of them statistically go on to get a 4-year university degree, you're kind of left with this moral quandary. What skills have we equipped all 100, but especially that other 80% with? And what is their economic destiny in a society where inequity is growing? That's why we tried as a state to play our role in catalyzing the statewide expansion of pockets of excellence like had happened in Caddo Parish. And our role is limited. At the end of the day, it's the local communities, industry, higher ed, and the K-12 school systems that have to make it happen. But in creating a framework, a state can at least get it started and can be the energy, I think, that sustains it.
So Gayle and Deidra, you were telling me earlier that you two worked together and made some kind of initial important connections that were crucial to being able to do this work successfully. Can you tell us a little bit about how that worked and so folks listening to this can understand the necessary ingredients? Gayle, talk about Caddo Parish and what was going on there.
Well, in Caddo, I was principal for 14 years at our Career Center, and I knew that our young people needed more than a diploma when they walked across the stage. It wasn't yet required by the state, but we started working to establish industry-based certifications in our program so that students would have a value-added component when they left high school. We had strong advisory councils made up of business and industry, and as we developed those credentials, we didn't know really what we were doing initially. So we'd look at air conditioned refrigeration, look at all of the credentials that were out there, bring it to our advisory council and say, which ones really matter to you? And they would review them and make a recommendation. And then we would pursue those credentials for our students because we knew it mattered for them and added value to their opportunities as they left high school. We also knew that career guidance was critical, and that's where Deidra and I started doing some work together about what could be happening to support young people in our community. And we believe that it starts very early. I worked with our guidance counselors, and we always talked about there being a three-legged stool, that they provided support for schools that were social and emotional support. There was academic support, but they also supported with career awareness beginning at the very earliest grade all the way through high school and college. And that piece is often missing. Young people have to be introduced to opportunities beyond what they see on television, what they experience with their family members. We need to help them find their passion where they can grow and develop and thrive.
So Gayle, that work starts as early as elementary school?
In elementary school, you can have guest speakers that come in and talk about a wide variety of careers. There are those traditional ones that are always called on, but they need to hear a broader spectrum, and they need to start learning that presentation skills matter. When my son was 4 years old, I decided it was time to look at elementary schools, and I went and I visited schools, not to see what the teachers were doing, but to see what the students were doing. And I watched young people that were in kindergarten standing up and giving presentations. That's important. Now, their presentation was about whatever little scribbling they had done, but they were using communication skills to convey what was important to them. That's an important employability skill that they'll use their entire lives. So those experiences need to start in the earliest grades and continue all the way through. We talk about the value of workplace learning and having those experiences. Well, guest speakers in the classroom are workplace experiences, field trips are workplace experiences. As they move up in grade, you're looking at job shadowing, clinicals, paid and non-paid internships and externships for young people, where they're connected to the real world, to real work that matters every day. And it's not a false sense of self-esteem that they gain. It's real and it's meaningful, and it helps them identify that they really matter in life, that they have something to contribute, and that we need them. And every one of us needs that passion in our lives, and we need to help our students find that. That's part of our role as educators who care about our community, our workforce, and our economy.
So in this economy in 2016, which is so complex and so much in flux, and we have a hard time imagining what the jobs of the future will look like, because everything is changing and so quickly. How does a district, how does a state design a career pathway program that's going to interpret the labor market properly? Deirdre, can you take that question? What do you think? How do you do this?
I can speak on what we're doing in Louisiana. So in Louisiana, we have an awesome workforce commission, our State Department of Labor, as well as an awesome State Department of Education and an awesome Economic Development Department, who all seem to work together to do some great forecasting as far as occupations that are high demand and high wage in our region. And so we used and have used that data to align with the industry-based credentials that are being offered in our new Jumpstart program. I think that's key. Prior to that, we did have some industry-based credentials that weren't necessarily aligning to those high demand and high wage jobs. So being able to align those with real opportunities and prosperous opportunities for our students, I think has been tremendous. And I think we will continue to do that moving forward and monitor and modify as we need to. So I think that's, an awesome way to connect all of those different entities.
So how does this all get connected when a state or a district is looking to create this program? Who needs to be at the table? Who are the players that you have to collect? How does this actually work?
Well, the biggest governance of this system is really the fundamental problem, or it's the fundamental challenge, which is you have industry has its own workforce development solutions, higher ed plays its own role, and K-12 plays its own role. And a lot of the challenge in getting this work started and doing it at quality is there's a lot of self-interest there.
Sure.
There's self-interest in every one of those groups in growing their line of work and keeping their resources to themselves and in doing the thing that they know how to do. And that's not an indictment of anybody, that's just the way the world works. So bringing those groups together in a formal sense, and Deidra was talking about this, really gets at a lot of that. First, we have legislated in law the creation of a workforce investment council that is itself charged with approving or not approving industry-based credentials. We wiped the slate clean at the statewide level because industry, higher ed, and K-12 came to the table and said, let's really look at workforce demand. But I would also say that Louisiana has an economy in a sense, but the job market is a regional job market. Kids from Shreveport don't move to New Orleans that often to work, and kids from New Orleans don't move to Shreveport that often to work. Every piece of research shows most graduates from high school or college tend to end up being working adults within a reasonably tight radius of where they actually were born and raised. And in light of that, you have to build the delivery system for career credentials around the regional job market. And that may mean that in certain markets, hotel and hospitality work is more relevant than in others where forestry work is a big deal. There are statewide credentials, most definitely, but you need to create a local governing structure that's responsive to the local needs. And so we created regional teams called Jumpstart Regional Teams, of which we have 11, where all of the local school boards, the community colleges, and industry representatives sit to make determinations about what will be available and what will be prioritized and how it will be delivered in each of those regions. This is an important point. We're not at this place yet in Louisiana. We talk a lot about school choice in this country. What we don't talk enough about is course choice. And if you grow up in one city versus another, a rural region versus an urban region, what access do you have in an economy that is as dynamic as the one that you described to the courses and the credentials that you need? That's something we need to start talking about. It's a matter of civil rights in order for you to be competitive in this marketplace. And giving kids, all kids, access to industry-based credentials and the career courses and dual enrollment courses that they need to get there is a critical issue just as much as school choices.
I was going to ask, just in terms of the cost to public systems, just a really well-designed career and technical education program, is that actually more expensive than your traditional college prep? You've got to have educators who are trained in these varied topics. You've got to have equipment and resources. So how does that compare to traditional college prep program?
It's absolutely more expensive. And not only is it more expensive because of equipment and such, but it's more expensive because somebody who teaches electrician work in a high school making $40,000 a year could be over making $100,000 a year working in the craft trades. So, there's a cost, and the cost is an important investment, or else you're not going to be able to get it done. And we'd all just be lying if we said that. I'm an English teacher. It just costs a lot more to teach welding and information technology systems than it does to teach Macbeth. The good news is I do think you see states starting to make strategic investments. So Governor Cuomo and what he did with IBM and P-Tech in New York, Governor Brown and what he did with all of the career and technical work going on in California. In Louisiana, we've invested in two ways. First, we created in our state funding formula, a tiered system where if you get a statewide high-growth, high-wage course and you're offering that course in a high school, we double your money for that course. But we also created a specific pot of funding that is specific to providers outside of the walls of the high school. We've got to catalyze private providers, like in our state, Associated Builders and Contractors, or information technology providers, coding systems like Operation Spark out of New Orleans. We've also got to catalyze our community and technical college. And so we created a funding stream in our funding formula that's specific to those providers beyond the walls of the high school. It's time to admit, high schools do need more in order to fund these types of courses, but also there is no way that a high school in today's day and age can keep up with the rapid changes of industry itself, and we've got to allow kids access to and have to fund institutions beyond the high school to prepare kids for the world beyond high school.
Gayle, can you talk a little bit about the community college role in all of this?
Well, to me, the role of the community college kind of comes in on several different fronts. One is, as you identify, as we have in our region, those high demand industries that you're focusing on. And in our area, we've focused on manufacturing, transportation, healthcare, construction, information technology, and energy. Then you'd have assigned those pathways at the high school level that will continue with the community and technical college programs in your region to support those industries. So you need to look at that connection from high school to post-secondary so that that pathway development and career development work can continue. That's one way. Another way is we already have people that are out in the workforce employed at those businesses that have a skills gap. They're missing some of what we're now providing at the high school level. And so the community college fills those gaps by training and upgrading the workforce that we currently have as we're working with K-12 to provide those incoming workers that can fill those positions as that workforce retires. So it's twofold.
Okay, so I'm going to step back for a minute, and here's the thorny question in all of this, which is career and technical education has its critics. There are some people who think that what this is doing is, historically, it has been tracking kids. You guys go to careers, you guys go to college. And often the kids that go to careers are low-income minority kids. And we know that if you have a bachelor's degree from a four-year institution over your lifetime, you earn considerably more than if you have an associate's degree or if you have a technical degree. So aren't we talking about deciding which kids go to college and which kids do not? And how do you
I'm
deal with
absolutely
that?
responding to this one.
Okay, go ahead.
You
Gayle.
definitely do not, because you have young people that are trying to figure out what their futures will be. In our drafting program, we had young people coming in that were trying to decide if they wanted to be an architect or an engineer, and if they wanted to be an engineer, what type of engineer they wanted to be. You have young people that are trying to figure out what college degree they want to focus on because they know the career that they're interested in. So you need to start with the end in mind and work backwards to the courses that you take in high school and beyond that get you to those opportunities. I wish you could meet many of our former students and see what they're doing today. They may have started in welding because that was an interest area at the time, but they have seen that they can achieve and they have moved to other components. We have young people who, still young to me, are now the marketing director for Red Bull, that are attorneys in our community. They didn't know they could learn until they were in our school, and they saw what they had to offer, and they learned a new way to attach learning and meaning to their lives. So I don't think it holds them back. I think it opens up the doors. We're all about empowering young people for their future, and that's the focus of this. Instead of giving them something almost impermanent and passing, they're temporary. We're giving them something real that they can build on as they scaffold to a future that really matters for them and their families.
Yeah, I think we have to stop talking about this as somehow like the other side of the coin versus the four-year university degree. And in this day and age, the path to prosperity is so layered, so many steps, so complicated. Kids are going to take such different directions, and it's going to take such different durations of time for them to do it, that for us to think that we're sitting there playing puppeteer with kids' lives is a real mistake. I do think at some point in high school, a young man and woman needs to commit to a meaningful body of work. And that can mean pursuing a career credential. It can also mean the choice not to. And I think you should have to leave high school when you get that diploma, and it should mean something. You should qualify for a four-year university. You should qualify for your two-year college. You should have advanced standing in one or the other or in both. But it's all about giving the kid open doors upon graduating from high school that allow him or her to continue the education. It's never about the end of the education. And that's a critical thing in how states set up their policy environment. Look, 4 years ago in Louisiana, we had a system where kids who had failed the 8th grade test, and Deidra and I worked on this in the legislature, where kids who had failed the 8th grade test were forced to choose a career pathway in order to be allowed into high school. And lo and behold, almost 100% of those kids were low income. The overwhelming majority of them were African American. And not only did it have an intense civil rights disadvantage for those young people, but it had the also negative effect of telling everybody else, stay away from whatever that is. So you had a situation where the 2% were getting pigeonholed into this little compartment, and everybody else is saying, I don't want any part of career and technical education. States have to comb through their policies and make sure that there is no bias, no fundamental prejudice against career education and its participants in order to make career participation sellable, in order to dedicate the resources to it, and in order to make sure that it's not, in the way you describe, a systemic disadvantage for a lot of kids of color and a lot of low-income kids in this country, because we have to be honest with the fact that for many decades, it was that in many places.
Sure. Deidra, do you have anything you want to add to that? Or?
Sure, I'm just going to add also the component of lifetime learning that John alluded to. So I think the earlier that you get students in the habit of looking at a career and not just completing a diploma or completing a degree is for the better. For instance, all of us, we just can't stop learning and be effective at our jobs. Whether that's, learning another credential or continuing to learn, another part of your discipline, I think it's just important to do for the majority of your career. So it's no longer, I went to school for this for 2 years, 4 years, 12 years, whatever it is, and this is what I do for the rest of my life. Most jobs of tomorrow aren't going to be like that. And so we have to train our minds and change our mindsets to think about a more progressive type of education. And I think having different career pathways is the perfect way to do that.
So can you tell us, Deidra, I'm curious about industry's perspective on all of this, and what are the major obstacles from the business sector to getting involved in this, and what are the challenges that business faces?
I can, as it relates to Louisiana, and I'm sure it's the same in a lot of other states, industry needs a clear blueprint on what to do. It is, a lot of the times we'll go into the room and we don't really have an interface or interaction with school districts or government agencies until it's an ask. Usually it's a financial ask. And so I believe that industry partners need to be more, and from our side, need to be more organic in the beginning of those relationships to make them sustainable. And that takes a lot of work. And actually, you have some employers and some industries that are traditionally more aligned with that type of thinking. But it's going to be a huge, teaching mechanism for a lot of companies that aren't traditionally like that, especially those in certain industries. I think manufacturing has a good lead. IT companies have a good lead. Agricultural companies have been doing very well in that space. But across industry sectors, there is a learning curve. And I think that is, something that has to be worked on nationwide.
I think there's also a learning curve with educators and how to interact with employers.
Sure.
And I know when I became principal of the Career Center, there were advisory councils in existence, but it was teachers who had asked their friends to be on their advisory council. They weren't the leaders of those businesses and industry that needed to be at the table. And so I worked to invite those individuals to our advisory councils. And then I did role plays with teachers on what they should do in advisory council, how they should listen more, ask questions, listen more, and then the next meeting report back in terms of what they had accomplished that the employers had requested. So it was really shifting. A lot of times in their meetings they wanted to say everything that they were doing. That's not what the employer wants to hear. The employer wants to hear, I matter, tell me how I can help, listen to what I have to say, and implement my suggestions. And so they had always come to the table with a plan, but they were open to have that plan or draft adjusted according to what the employer needed. So really shifting it from educators telling to educators asking and listening and implementing what they learned.
Interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking about whether it makes sense to have vocational, technical, career training in a school, blending in with the rest of your general education, or whether it makes sense to have schools that are designed to do this, like a P-Tech in New York. Do you guys have any thoughts about your preference? What works best? What do you think?
Well, I think it depends what you're trying to achieve, and I think all of them can work. You have P-Tech, which is a very specific focus leading to a very challenging and rigorous credential. You also have comprehensive high schools that offer a variety of programs. And then you have centers, like a county may have a center where they send kids to that place, and then there are industry-based settings. What I've realized is that the infrastructure necessary to provide at scale challenging, appropriate coursework for this day and age means you really need to use all of the above and more. And absent that, you have no hope of keeping up with A, kids' interests, and B, the changes in the modern workplace. And if I were to criticize where I see today's landscape across the country, I'd say there's not enough structured industry engagement, as Deidra is talking about. I'd say there is too much institutional self-preservation between higher ed and K-12 and not enough sharing of resources. And finally, I'd say that within our high schools, we oftentimes don't have enough openness to the changes in the world around us, the necessity for kids to be enrolled sometimes beyond the four walls of the high school, and a willingness to say to our own people, and Gayle said this earlier, you have to change your skills too. It's not enough to be an ag teacher who was certified 25 years ago. Let's take the foundational skills that you have as an ag teacher and let's upgrade to today's capacities. Too often we organize around the way we've done business for decades, and as a result, we don't remotely keep pace with the changes that our kids need us to keep pace with.
Sure. I'm wondering whether we've got some time, and we've got a lot of people in this room who are interested in this subject, so I think we'll open this up to questions from the audience. We've got 2 microphones, and they're coming right at you. If you can just stand up and introduce yourself and pose your question.
Thank you. Tony Shivers from United Way Worldwide. Thank you for being here. I appreciate the commentary. Question for Superintendent White. A recent Washington Post article, your state financial crisis, and I wonder, how that's going to affect education funding for your state, education system, and then ensuring that your students are going to be ready for college, post-secondary training, and the global economy.
Did you hear that question?
Yeah, it's about the financial calamities in our state,
Sure.
and thank you for asking. I do worry about it. Of course, I think the good news is I think K-12 education generally will be prioritized in our budget situation, which is a challenge, which is good. The challenge is how we invest in kids beyond K-12. And I do worry deeply about kids in the one of the poorest states in the country who need a leg up, not so much in terms of the funding for high school, but the funding for what comes after high school. And that every young man and woman needs us to invest in their future in some form or fashion in a way that's appropriate for the means that they are leaving high school with. And I do really, really worry that in a financial crisis, something that will be sacrificed is how we give kids a leg up who maybe don't meet this criterion or that criterion. When they come out of high school, what opportunity are they having in a financially starved environment to college scholarships and to workforce training, in an environment where oftentimes for the lower achieving kids, those are the first things to go. That, I think, is deeply concerning.
Deirdre, you're shaking your head. You agree with that?
Ditto.
Ditto. Okay. All right.
And thank you for your support for higher academic standards students.
Thank you.
I see there's somebody way in the back there.
Craig McKenzie, Cherry Hill Regional High School in Southern Rhode Island. I just want to affirm the blended strategy. We have a career and technical center that is it's blended right in with our post-secondary, college prep programs, and I think in two ways it's really served us well. One, we've got multiple programs of the 13 that we offer where there are one, criminal justice in particular, the top eight of the top 25 students in our graduating class this year are getting certifications in that program as well, and I think there's opportunities in the career and technical programs that help kids to discover and get certifications that they need so that they can get scholarships so they can go on to post-secondary or right into industry if they want to. And if anything, as the assistant principal, we just went through a reconfiguration this year where now we're seeing that for our college prep students, we built into our program of studies where they could have students could create endorsements. So they could take a series of 3 classes in PE or in ELA or in social studies, link it to 60 hours of internship or extracurricular outside of school with some industry representative or someone who had expertise, and take an exam, could even be like an AP exam, and we'll give them an endorsement on the diploma. But I think we're learning in the traditional high school setting that we have a lot to learn from the CTC, the career and technical programs, in regards to how we can best prepare kids for finding an area of expertise that makes them attractive for scholarships and for entrance to post-secondary institutions, or prepares them for financing their post-secondary education. We've got cosmetology students who are taking that course solely because they know that they're going to cut hair to pay their way through college when they go, and they're thinking strategically about that. So I think there's a value in that blended strategy.
And also, there are many employers that will either reimburse or pay for continued education if it's in their career field when a young person comes to them. And that's one of the reasons that we started a number of the industry credentials that we have, because we knew that those employing agencies would help our young people who didn't have the means be able to continue their education and move forward in their career, particularly in the area of healthcare, but there are other employers as well.
Free rides to 3 of our students. The students are actually taking their University of Rhode Island courses right in the Electric Boat campus, and they'll work for Electric Boat, get the most current education related to submarine technology, whatever it is, the engineering programs that they're doing. They'll graduate, go right into a job at Electric Boat, or be as currently trained as they could possibly be, free of charge, because
That's fantastic.
EB really wants those people.
And we're in our 21st year of the Caddo Career and Technology Foundation, and it's employers in our community that give around $60,000 a year, award 40 scholarships for students that compete just within that school, and it's for them to continue their education. This year we'll top the $1 million mark of contributions to young people's future in our community, because they want them to know that business and industry in the Northwest Louisiana area want them in our community.
Let me add to that. Did you say Rhode Island or Ohio? Rhode Island. I do think that we have to recognize now that we're exiting NCLB and coming into this new federal law, and states are thinking about how we do this. Every state has a system for what it tells high school principals and APs it wants them to do. And we can't sit in this room and expect anything to change so long as those accountability or incentive and reward systems create disincentives for high school principals to do the things that you're talking about. And I'll be honest with you, as I survey states and I look at how many of their school performance score or letter grade or however they do their high school ranking, stars, whatever it is, how many of those systems really incorporate long-term prosperity, or meaningful credentials in the world of work and higher education for their graduates? And the answer is very few. And that should be really concerning to those of us who are interested in achieving quality and scale, because there are systems of assessment, there are systems of measurement and validation that states can be incorporating into their accountability systems to incent principals and APs to do exactly what you're talking about. Unfortunately, too often principals and APs are just doing the right thing, and sometimes they're going against the real incentives that states have built into those systems when they go and seek the kind of opportunities you're talking about for your kids.
And the Louisiana Community and Technical College System has established goals that mirror and extend what we're doing with K-12 education to really push that involvement in post-secondary, the credentials, and the involvement with business and industry. And we have a foundation at our school that raises money for scholarships. We have employers that contribute to those, and then we have events to raise funds. I know in my workforce division we're having a golf tournament to raise funds so that we can offer scholarships to workforce so that we can increase the skills that are there. So I think there are a lot of ways to support young people as they need to move forward in the skill set that they develop, and each community needs to look for as many ways as they can possibly find to help support that, because we don't have any throwaway people. We need everybody for our economy to thrive and grow.
Other questions? In the back. Sir, hi.
I'm in Reno, Nevada, and in our neck of the woods, advanced manufacturing is the big push right now in CTE, with Tesla moving into the area. And as exciting as that is, I wonder how we're going to kind of evaluate the success of the students moving through that program and graduating, not only their success in post-secondary placement, positive post-secondary placement, which is usually surveyed, 6 months to a year after graduation, and the rates are really, really good for students graduating from CTE. The positive post-secondary placement rates are really high, but only in that first year after graduation, and I'm wondering how we can evaluate the success down the road, not only to see if a student stays in advanced manufacturing in that example, but are they making positive pivots later on if they need to or they want to? Are they successful at job hopping later in life? And so, do you know of any, and this is to anybody on the panel, any longitudinal research that's being done to kind of see not just the 1 year after graduation positive post-secondary placement, but later down the road?
Yeah, and I would also, it's a good question, and I would say that there's also, to be clear, there's a difference between evaluating schools based on the types of measures you're talking about versus evaluating the success of the initiative. And we've only really begun to dig into these data, but if you look at the National Clearinghouse data from higher ed, you look at your own state's Workforce Commission data, you can see a pretty good longitudinal view of the prosperity and successes and ups and downs of the kids you're graduating in particular pathways, and that certainly helps you to see it. I'll tell you, for example, and I was just on a conference call about this, I have been stunned by what the data show about kids who you would have thought, having graduated with specific credentials, where they end up in less than a year, frankly, and what an impact that summer after graduation has, across the state. It's really amazing, even when you just look that far out. That's a different question, I think, from what you can trace back to a high school's control. There's a lot of temptation and a lot of dialogue about schools should be evaluated based on the long-term prosperity and economic gain of their kids and their graduates and so on. I'm a little more skeptical of that, given for all the reasons you described, all the choices that come down the line. And I'm actually pretty excited about leaning in on credentials and college scholarships as ways of evaluating those, and college preparation as ways of evaluating our high schools. But in terms of longitudinal studies, yes, I think it's badly needed, both academically and to be done by states. We're just digging into it, learning a ton about it, and frankly, every program that aspires to what we're aspiring to needs to be doing that.
Other questions? Hi.
Hi, my name is Jordan. I work at College Street Vocational Center in Calcasieu Parish, and I teach English, but my husband teaches pipe fitting, and my father-in-law teaches carpentry. And I was just wondering if y'all plan on us moving towards a standards base, because I have students come in that are taking auto tech, that are taking welding, and they have a D or an F, and I'm like, how do you have a D? You know, like, I don't understand. But they actually have all this knowledge. It's just that the grading system, you know, may not be fit to their standards. You understand what I'm saying? So the kid may be able to change oil and have different skills in auto tech, but maybe not the best actual student doesn't come with his change out clothes or, you know, things like that. So are we going to make a movement towards standard-based grading so that these plants and industries can see, okay, this kid can actually do these things, and if so, how do we plan on doing that?
I couldn't hear that question. It was, oh, you guys, okay. I'm sorry, we all had some difficulty hearing that question. Can you repeat it and just hold the mic out a little bit a little farther in front of your mouth? I'm sorry, it was bouncing and echoing up here. I thought it was just me, but.
Standards-based grading.
Thank you.
For workforce type courses. Is there a movement in changing the grading policy?
Thank you for the interpretation. Is there a movement for changing the standards-based grading system to accommodate career preparation courses?
And you said you're from Louisiana, is that right? Yeah. Where are you from? Calcasieu Parish. You know, we're not working on that. I'd love to talk more with you about it, though. It's something that it sounds interesting, and it sounds like something that could have real potential. I'd love to chat with you about it.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Tiffany Godbout-Williams, and I am the Vice President of the 114th Partnership. We connect industry and school districts around the nation on productive partnerships. And I'm really heartened by your, up closer, better? I'm very heartened by your progressive and nuanced understanding of this, and I'm so heartened to hear a superintendent talk about this in such a positive way. But my question is really around career exposure. So we talked about self-interest of industry, and industry, I've worked on both sides of this fence. Industry is often really wedded to whatever they do. In communities and schools, we do a job shadowing program, or we do this. And I just wonder we have some data that shows there's some regression to mean. So kids who are really interested in something, if they participate in a passive career activity, they sometimes lose interest in that field. So how are you giving kids opportunities to explore these different careers so that they can choose a pathway or a career path that they're most interested in?
We've done a lot of work with career readiness courses at the middle and the high school level, but the work starts before that as students are in the elementary level gaining career awareness, at the middle school level going through career exploration activities and experiences, and then at the high school level shifting to career preparation. And part of it is educating the educators, the teachers and the counselors, and along that line we've had a number of teacher externships that we've funded with Jumpstart investment that's made a difference in our region alone. We've had 33, we'll do more this summer. And those externships involve teachers going into a business for the week, learning as much as they can about all aspects of that industry, preparing a PowerPoint that they present back to the leaders of that company at the end of the week, thanking them for their time, their investment in them, even though it's not out of pocket, they do lose productivity, and letting them know what they learn that they'll take back to their schools and classrooms. Then those same teachers represent that PowerPoint to their entire faculty and staff at their school, so it leverages the learning on a broader level. And they prepare at least one lesson plan, maybe more, that they take back into their classrooms and share with their students. So with that one teacher going into an externship experience, you educate the entire school, as well as every student that they teach that year and from then on. This year we're focusing not just on a career tech ed teacher who's going to be in that career pathway having that externship, but combining an academic teacher with a career tech ed teacher in that externship experience where they plan that PowerPoint and those lesson plans together. And we see that as a very positive investment in those educators that are in those career pathways. A lot of times we talk about focusing on counselors, but most students don't really know their counselors very well. They know their teachers, and they know the teachers that they connect with and they respect. And so getting those teachers to a greater level so that every person who interacts with students understands that they have a role as a counselor and an advocate for that student.
I think that is such a good point, and maybe tangentially related to your question. At the same time, I think that we shouldn't accept that the counselor model that exists today is the best way of counseling kids on post-secondary readiness. And that's not a knock on counselors, and it's an acceptance of what Gayle says, which I think on some level is true. I mean, who are we to say which adult should be the one that helps the kid figure out where she wants to go in life? But the idea that I taught in high school, my first school, 3,000 kids, we had 8 counselors. I mean, the idea that these 8 people should somehow be able to get deep into a young man or young woman's life and figure out their interests and help them guide, it's just outrageous. I mean, there's no way that's going to work. And every year we come back and do the same old thing on this structure without acknowledging that every kid has a right to have a regular conversation to reflect on where they're going in life. And whether you do that through your traditional counselors, whether you do it through a structure like Gayle is talking about, where you empower more adults to be that team for the child, or whether you actually make investments in organizations and people that provide scalable, post-secondary specific counseling solutions. And I think that's so important. Post-secondary counseling is such a different thing from the entire set of skills required of a professional school counselor. There's no reason we can't provide greater access to post-secondary regular counseling discussions for kids, and we've got to figure out a way to break through this, or else we are missing a lot of the energy and everything that we're up here talking about.
Do any districts in Louisiana do that? Do they have post-secondary counselors that's all?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I have seen about this is that it is a difficult job, but it is not an impossible thing for a lay person to learn. You need to be somebody who's familiar with students, familiar with the education system, but we have an organization called Career Compass founded by teachers, and this is all they do. I mean, they have a regular conversation with young men and women about their interests, about their academic and other past, and about where that takes them from here just on a regular basis. And they've gotten very, very good at routine, regular conversations that help young people to reflect and to design a path forward. It's the most basic and obvious of things, but it doesn't happen because we've let constructs that are entirely of our own creation get in the way. And so I love the idea of teams of teachers working with kids. I also, though, think that we do need to have people positioned who have an expertise in the world of college and work. And if you try to do that through a ratio of 400 to 1, you're just kidding yourself and you're hurting the children.
Other questions? Anybody else? Do we have?
Hi, my question is for Mr. White. So my name is Nathan Green. I work with a company called SureScore. We vertically align K-12 college and the workforce. We didn't talk at all about youth who drop out of school, and that's a big number in most states, and especially with the new WIOA funding. How is Louisiana handling those types of candidates in the workforce?
Sorry, just confirm for me, because the echo is kind of rough. How are we handling dropouts?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you need a comprehensive approach to the question of promoting graduation. I think the good news is we've seen it as a country that it's a way that we can make real demonstrable gains. And actually, as depressing as many of the static education indicators around the country are, graduation is actually one that's moving in the right direction. And why is that? I think largely it's first because states, some of them by their own volition, some of them because they had to, simply said, we're now going to value this. And so now you have a lot of kids moving across the finish line, many, many more than you had before. I think you have 2 problems. One, you still have persistent places where there have been no structural changes, and you have extraordinarily large conglomerations of low-income kids who are overage, undercredited, and every year we send kids to these high schools. We haven't made the structural changes necessary to get them across the finish line. Second, and I think a more complicated issue, is that I think largely the diploma has become a less valuable thing, not just because of changes in the world, but because when you say to states, go do this, and the policy is entirely within states' control to define what this is, states are largely going to make it easier for kids to achieve that thing. The good news on the first one, I think, is that there's now real research over the last 10 years that indicates how can states and large municipalities actually address this situation. And I was very proud to be a part of this effort in New York City. And when you look at the Mathematica research or the MDRC research about the New Schools effort in New York, there you saw really, really demonstrable dropout prevention work being done at scale. But it took a fundamental restructuring of the high schools. And I think as ESSA comes around, we're going to have to do more than just looking at some, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, promotion rules and how we create ninth grade academies. We're going to have to look at those large urban high schools that we all know the names of, that have huge, huge numbers of overaged, undercredited, typically kids of color. And we accept that they go through this routine high school experience every year, and without fundamentally changing the structure of the high school, nothing changes. So we have to do that there. I don't know how the diploma issue shapes out over the course of the ESSA discussion. You know, the good news is we're all having this discussion up here, and the context is it's actually more challenging under what we're talking about for kids to graduate from high school. I don't see that happening everywhere. In fact, in this state, you had a large step, in my view, in a direction backwards a couple of years ago around graduation standards. And in particular for students with disabilities, this really, really worries me. As states are able to define more of their own measures, as they're able to relax requirements a little bit more, I have a grave, grave concern that within the diploma requirement, you'll start to see a lot of relaxation, grad rates go up, everybody's happy, but at the end of the day, it's not helping anybody. Fundamentally, what we have done in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, we need to do, I think, more beyond those cities, which is a real fundamental restructuring of high schools, and in particular, the ninth grade experience.
And then also realizing that those young people are already out there that have dropped out. We need to have safety nets to grab them and engage them in positive ways, whether it's Youth Build, whether it's Jobs for America's graduates, whether it's adult ed programs, middle colleges. We need ways to pull them back into productivity and positiveness in our communities. And that's another role of K-12 education partnering with technical and community colleges, because those folks are already out there. Yes, we have to build those bridges and make that as strong as we can so they don't drop out, but we also need to recognize that there are some out in our community, many unfortunately, that need these other structures to help them move forward.
I think we have time for one more question if we've got somebody. Hi.
Deborah Weiss, Northwestern University. I have a question in the same spirit as the question about grades, but with a slightly different focus. I think several of you mentioned the issue of employer credentials, and I sort of have a two-part question about that. Typically, when you hear about efforts like this, usually on a smaller scale, this is wonderful that you did it on a statewide basis, there's a great effort for one-on-one work with individual employers. You get a credential that the employer or a small consortium of employers is happy with. But there seems to be, I think it's understood generally, a problem with scalability and with not necessarily being able to draw on the experiences of previous people who've done same things, and it's a little hard competing with that. And it's very hard to transfer the knowledge from each effort to the next one. So I have a sort of a two-part question. A, was there some infrastructure that you found you were able to draw on, any of the efforts by ANSI or any of the other credentialing organizations that helped you with your credentialing efforts? And is there anything that either is or can being done to take what you've done, which has obviously been a great success, and extract it and use it as a model for future states doing the same thing?
Yeah, unfortunately, for a very odd and large number of factors, we were probably not able to understand everything you said, but there's some drilling upstairs or something, and then there's this crazy echo effect up here, so I apologize. But if what you were basically asking is about scalability, I'll give you, is that basically what you were asking? Okay, I'll give you 3 basic things. First, you need policies that are coherent and that create incentives that will pull the change across the system. And as I said before to the gentleman from Rhode Island, a lot of state accountability systems and funding systems, I think, just disincent this area of activity. They don't reward high schools and high school principals for doing it, and they don't fund real costs that are involved. Second, states or big cities do need to have a strategy for creating a community of practice and for diffusing the learnings of that community of practice. We use what's called a network structure, where we pilot the most avant-garde examples of the innovators like Gayle, for example. We let them go and run with pretty sizable grants. They go do their thing. We allow them to be a community of practice, and we use what we call a network structure to slowly diffuse the change across the system. Third, I would say that there is an absence, I think, in the career and technical space of what I would call nonprofit intermediaries who are there to help all of these groups come together to actually translate their desires into academic programs. And I think, when you look at the New Schools work that we did in New York City, for example, you got the College Board, New Visions for Public Schools, all of these organizations came together to broker the desire of the Department of Education to the relationship with the principal and to build new schools. I don't see a similar philanthropic investment and a similar nonprofit presence, except in California, in the CTE space right now. And I really, really worry that hurts where you don't have the Gayle Flowerses of the world. It hurts to help create good models in a local context of what we're talking about. We need philanthropy to actually start making serious investments, I think, in a group of super high capacity intermediaries to assist translating industry and states' desires into local action. Until that happens, I think the diffusion is going to be very difficult at scale.
And I certainly agree with those things. I think there can also be incentives for business and industry to be involved that would pull them into the picture at a greater level. We also need to shift people's thinking of what work experiences are. If you're a high school principal in a small rural community, you have custodials workers that do building maintenance, you have cafeteria workers that do culinary, you have healthcare workers that come in and take care of the students in that school. So sometimes it's also thinking differently about the resources that are available to you. Maybe you have an electrician that is coming in for the school district to do something for the day. You could have a student shadow that electrician that day and learn about that career. So sometimes it's just being a little more creative with the resources that are available to us. That's not enough, but it is a part of the answer, is thinking differently for solutions, not always expecting somebody else to hand it to you, but figuring out how you can help make it happen yourself.
Thank you so much. This was such a thought-provoking discussion, and thank you for joining us. Please join me in thanking our panel. Deidra, John, and Gayle. Enjoy the rest of the conference.